Okay, next is over to Shaykh Yunus.
الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ومن اتبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ومن أحياها فكأنما أحيا الناس جميعا. صدق الله العظيم. It's a pleasure to be here today to discuss the religious dimension of organ transplantation. And as always within our religious discourse, you find differences of opinion. But let's discuss the basis of organ donation, what the scholars say, and then we'll talk about the difference of opinion. So, as Zulfi mentioned, around different types of transplants. So, you've got the animal transplants that could happen from cross species, and although there's some discussion regarding pigs and animals not slaughtered according to Islamic rites, if you look at the majority of scholars, even if it's a valve of a pig for a heart, they allow it on the basis of extremes. So whenever there's a animal part that is going to go into a human being, majority of the scholars, if not all of the scholars, are agreed that it's fine. The second type of transplantation, autotransplantation, where tissues are taken from one part of the body and transplanted to another part of the body, again, majority, if not all scholars, are agreed that that is allowed. And then you have the transplant of a tissue or organ from one human being to another, and this is where the discussion really gets a little bit heated. If it's a live donor, so someone has a kidney failure and one of their relatives wants to donate their kidney to their relative, then again you find that majority of the scholars are fine with that. The real difference of opinion you find is when a person dies, and then are they allowed to donate their organs or not? And there's dissenting scholars and there's those who agree as well. Let's take the arguments of those who are against organ donation first. The Qur'an mentions in chapter number 17, verse number 70, وَلَقَدْ كَذَبْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ وَحَمَلْنَاهُمْ فِي الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ وَرَزَقْنَاهُمْ مِنَ الطَّيِّبَاتِ. That assuredly we have honored the children of Adam and provided them with transport on land and sea. So it's this honor issue that the children of Adam have been given, human beings have been given an honorable status to such a level that they should not be harmed in any way. So that's the first kind of principle or the concept that is put forward. The second one, the second principle which people have mentioned and the scholars have mentioned, is that man is not the owner of his body but merely a trustee. So Allah says in the Qur'an, إِنَّ اللَّهَ اشْتَرَى مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ أَنفُسَهُمْ وَأَمْوَالَهُمْ بِأَنَّ لَهُمُ الْجَنَّةَ. That indeed Allah has purchased of the believers their persons and their goods in return for the garden of paradise. So again, one of the concepts or principles which the scholars mention is that human beings are not the owners of their bodies, and therefore they do not have a right to make a decision about their body after death. Also, normally you are not allowed to cut any part of the body without any reason. So that's another point which the dissenting scholars or jurists mention, that because this might be deemed as mutilation, and a majority of Muslims, if not all, are against postmortems. unless it is legally binding. Therefore, one of the reasons is because you're not allowed to cut a body after death. So these are some of the arguments which are given against organ donation. Also, an amputated body or organ is impure. And therefore, when you take out an organ, it's an impure organ which you are putting into somebody else, and that is another argument which is mentioned. Also, it could be open to abuse and misuse, and when permissibility and prohibition are opposed, prohibition takes precedent, and overall what they're trying to say is that it compromises a special honour accorded to man. So that's some of the dissenting jurists who mention these points. The consenting jurists, they mention that al-darurat tubihu mahdurat. There's a principle that whenever there is a necessity, the necessity makes the prohibited permissible. And here there is a necessity, and therefore all the points that you have mentioned have become permissible because of the necessity. They are not being done out of necessity. So it brings about the restoration of the body. There are many instances where jurists have allowed the use of impure substances for medical purposes. So for example, the same jurists allow blood donation. The same jurists allow bone marrow donation. So blood is impure and yet they allow blood donation. So if in one circumstance it's impure, then it should be impure in all circumstances. Regulation can assure that abuse and misuse of the human body is avoided, and especially in this country we have very good regulation. And whenever, in normal circumstances, prohibition takes precedence over permission, but here it's not normal circumstances, it's a darura and it's a necessity. So, if you look at both arguments, there's dissenting jurists and there are jurists that agree with organ donation. And historically, the jurists have been discussing this since about the 1970s, 1980s. And what we find is that majority of the fiqh organizations throughout the world, whether it's Saudi Arabia and the Jeddah Islamic Fiqh Academy, or Islamic Fiqh Council, or whether it's Malaysia, or whether it's Jordan, or whether it's Egypt, or whether it's Kuwait, majority of the fiqh councils around the world have given permissibility with the conditions that Dr. Zulfi mentioned earlier, that they can't be sold, there's certain organs that are not allowed, and there has to be a need, etc., etc. So if all those conditions are met, then majority of the fiqh organizations around the world have given permissibility since the 1980s. Since the 1980s, it's not something which is new. Since the 1980s, 1990s as well, many of the fiqh organizations throughout the world have given permissibility. However, what we find is that there is a clear demarcation in terms of the jurists who are hailing from the Asian subcontinent. So if you look at the Arab scholars, if you look at the Southeast Asian, in terms of Malaysia, Singapore, etc., they all have given consent. But we still find that within the Asian subcontinent, the scholars are still, a majority of them are dissenting jurists in terms of not allowing organ donation, based on the arguments that they have put forward. Although it has been discussed at the Indian Islamic Fiqh Academy quite a few times in their seminars, and slowly but surely there are a few who are moving towards consent. For example, Maulana Khalid Saifullah Rahmani, who is one of the leading scholars in India from Hyderabad, he has consented to organ donation after death as long as the conditions are met. There are a few scholars in Pakistan who have also consented in allowing organ donation. Now in this country, it depends where people are. We live according to the Prime Minister, we live in our ghettos, and we live in our particular areas, and we don't mix with other people, and therefore we form our opinions within those areas. So if you live in Bradford, or is it Oldham, you said? Bradford or Oldham, then you have some scholars there who will give an opinion, and the whole community will follow that particular opinion. So this issue has been divisive within the Muslim community in this country. There was a fatwa which was given by the Muslim Sharia Council of this country by Dr. Badawi in 1995, where him and some scholars got together and they agreed and they gave a fatwa that organ donation is allowed. However, if you ask majority of the Asian subcontinent, and they make up the majority of the Muslim population in this country, that Dr. Zaki Badawi has said yes, and you tell them in the intensive care unit, they'll say, who is Dr. Zaki Badawi? So I think that's where we fall down. They want to know a scholar from the Asian subcontinent, or they want an opinion from the Asian subcontinent, or they want an opinion from their scholar in this country. And this is where we find difficulty at the moment. We have been in discussions in terms of the scholarship in this country. We've had a few meetings with the NHS Blood and Transplant organization, and we are trying to move this forward from a scholarly level. So we know that it won't move forward until the scholars agree on one platform to take out a message to the community that it's fine to donate organs. Now, according to the majority of the scholars, it's not only fine, it's a sadaqah. It's you are gifting something which is going to be rewarded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Allah says in the Qur'an, وَمَنْ أَحْيَاهَا فَكَأَنَّمَا أَحْيَا النَّاسَ جَمِيعًا, that whoever saves a life, then it is as if he has saved the life of all of humanity. And not only that, if that person goes on to do some good deeds, then you will be rewarded for those good deeds as well. So it's a sadaqah, and it's a reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it's something which is encouraged according to those who consent. But again, like I said, there is an issue around the dissenting scholars, and I don't think it's going to be resolved overnight. I think there's a meeting which is coming up in August next month, where we are going to try and move this forward, but I think it will take a couple more years before we can spread the problem that Zulfi has highlighted in terms of the discrepancy of those within the Asian community, especially the Muslim community, who are waiting for a donor and those who are giving a donor. And that discrepancy would then lead the scholars to understand the necessity, and that necessity would then allow them to give a fatwa of consent. Because without the necessity, in reality, if there's no necessity, then there will be no consent from any Jews. Because you're not allowed to take an organ out of somebody's body, or you're not allowed to cut somebody's body, full stop. However, because of the necessity, this is why it's happening. But I think the scholars do not understand the magnitude of
any questions from the floor? Yes, lady at the front here.
Thank you so much to all the speakers. It's been quite an eye-opener listening to all your points of views. But as a Muslim, everyone can say, oh, it's haram, our body's sacred. So you very kindly shared some examples, but could you be a bit more specific in who has said what, or which team of jurists have said what? Please.
Okay, so as I mentioned, the Arab scholars definitely are for organ donation. So if you look at the Saudi fatwa organizations, whether it's the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Countries, they have an Islamic fiqh body, they have said yes. You've got the Islamic fiqh, Council in Jeddah, they have said yes. You've got Al-Azhar University, you've got Jordan, you've got Kuwait, you've got Malaysia, you've got Singapore, you've got Morocco. So majority of and Shaykh Yunus Dudhwala has come out very strongly for organ donation. On the other side, you have Shaykh Mufti Taqi Usmani, who's a very renowned scholar within Pakistan, and his father, who was Mufti Muhammad Shafi. His father was Mufti Muhammad Shafi, and he was the Grand Mufti of Pakistan when Pakistan was formed. And in the 60s, 70s, he was the main Grand Mufti. And he wrote a booklet, A'za ki Pevandkari, in Urdu, which means it's about organ donation. And in there he refutes the permissibility of organ donation totally. And since then, his two sons, who are extremely qualified, who are very well renowned, and a lot of the scholars follow their opinions around the world, especially the Asian subcontinent scholars. And because Mufti Shafi Sahib had said no, his son Shaykh Mufti Taqi Sahib, who is also part of the Islamic Fiqh Council and he's very well renowned and he visits Arab countries quite a lot, he was once asked about organ donation and he does not say no. He doesn't say no, but he reserves his judgment. He reserves his judgment, and maybe in respect of his father, I think he feels that he doesn't want to say yes totally. But he never stops anyone from donating organs after death. That's the crucial part. And I think in this country, and as I mentioned in India, the Indian Islamic Fiqh Academy, IIFA, when they've asked the scholars around the country, majority have said no, but there are at least 3 or 4 who have said yes. And foremost after them is Maulana Khalid Saifullah, who's a very well-renowned, forward-thinking, I would say, scholar, Mufti of India, and his fatwa is online as well. So those are the type of names I can give you. Hopefully that answers your question. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, the lady at the back.
If we do donate our organs, is there procedures that have to be done Islamically? Does it have to be an Islamic doctor that actually takes the organs out? And if so, does the NHS accommodate for that? Or can it be any doctor that actually takes the organs out?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, from a religious perspective, anyone, the procedures in this country, and this is something which I've been looking into, because even if the problem we have in this country is the problem that's been highlighted, the discrepancy in terms of the numbers. So we have a specific problem in this country. In Pakistan, in India, in poorer countries, organs are being sold. Organs are being sold. That problem does not arise in this country. So what we are looking for as scholars who are getting together soon is to try and get a fatwa for at least this country. So, there isn't a risk of organs being sold in this country. In fact, there are people who are traveling from this country and they are going to India, they are going to Pakistan, and they are buying organs and they are having their operations there. And that specifically is mentioned that is not allowed. But the reason why it's happening is because of the lack of donors. So in this country, the other necessity part, which I asked the SNODs, is because I was speaking to one of the muftis and he said, well, what do you mean by necessity? So I said, there are so many people who are waiting for donors. So he said, but maybe they harvest these organs until they find somebody who will be a potential match. So I went to ask the SNODs and they said, no, the register is there. As soon as somebody comes and they are dying or they have died, and they are a potential donor, the register is there to try and find a match. And they will not take out the organ until they find a match. Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah? So the need is proven. So the necessity is there, because it's not going to be kept somewhere for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. It's going to be taken immediately. And thirdly, in terms of Islamically, they say that there should be no mutilation. In this country, the surgeons like Zulfi and others will tell you that it is done meticulously like any other type of surgery. It's different from a post-mortem. I've heard of post-mortems. I haven't seen a post-mortem yet, but I heard that it's totally different than the surgery. Okay? So it's done in a surgical manner, in a theatre. It's done meticulously, without any mutilation. So as long as all those conditions, it doesn't matter if it's a Muslim doctor, non-Muslim doctor, it doesn't matter.
Yes, please.
So I'm an organ donor.
Wait, what up?
And signing up was purely an emotional thing. So I had someone whose daughter was on the waiting list for an organ, and she came up and spoke to me, and they were trying to get people to sign up, and I signed up. And then I think it was about 3 weeks later, and I got my organ donation card in the post, and I was thinking, oh my God, what have I done? And I haven't gone back and I haven't opted out. But I kind of think sometimes going through the verses where your organs will kind of testify against you on the day of judgment, and I think, well, if I donate and my organ goes to somebody who misuses it, and that's just, yeah.
It's a very, it's a very good question. Anyway. Usually children ask that question. That's why children come up with amazing questions. In the Qur'an, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions يوم تشهد عليهم ألسنتهم وأيديهم وأرجلهم بما كانوا يعملون يومئذ يوفيهم الله دينهم الحق ويعلمون أن الله هو الحق المبين. And in another verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions how your hands and your feet and your skin will give testimony for every single action that we've done. And the person will turn around and he وَقَالُوا لِجُلُودِهِمْ لِمَ شَهِدْتُمْ عَلَيْنَا, that, oh my skin, why have you given testimony against me? وَقَالُوا لِجُلُودِهِمْ لِمَ شَهِدْتُمْ عَلَيْنَا قَالُوا أَنْتَقَنَا اللَّهُ الَّذِي أَنْتَقَ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made us speak just like He made every other every other object speak. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment will make our body parts speak. However, you are la yukallifu Allahu nafsan illa wus'aha. So you are only responsible as long as your organs are with you. And if somebody else takes their organ, then it will not be that organ that will speak against you. So don't worry about if it goes to some non-Muslim who is drinking alcohol and taking cocaine to it. If that happens, then you will not be responsible. Yeah, I think always, if somebody is thinking of donating an organ, always think of the positive. وَمَنْ أَحْيَاهَا فَكَأَنَّمَا أَحْيَا النَّاسَ جَمِيعًا. Whoever saves a life, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward them that they have saved the life of all of humanity. And do it with that purpose. It's altruism. And there will be dissenting voices, but that's a different opinion. And we can ignore that. You are going for the positive, keep positive thoughts about it.